Good morning. I thought I would put up a short post on being a Gentile. You know, most of the church today is Gentile. We don't think of it that way. We kind of think of ourselves as Jewish because the early church was all Jews. Christ was Jew, and he was crucified in Jerusalem and raised again in Jerusalem. And the early church were all Jews and converted Jews to Christianity. But then over time, the Gentile ranks have gotten larger and larger. So the church in America today is largely a Gentile church. What does that mean? Well, it's kind of interesting. If you go back to Adam and Eve and Noah, and they weren't Jewish. It was just Adam and Eve, and of course, Adam and Eve sinned, and God separated them from Himself. But they were dead spiritually when they were thrown out of the garden, and they had Seth and Abel, or Cain and Abel rather, and then Cain slew his brother. And so out of 4 people on the earth, one's a murderer and one's been murdered. It's amazing. Things just got worse, it seems, that until you got to Noah's time, and then God was fed up with the entire human race and decided to kill them all, drowned everybody, with the exception of Noah's family, which He saved. So Adam was kind of our first father, and then Noah now is really the second father of the human race, because other than Noah's family, no one survived. But it was all still one group of people at that point in time. And it wasn't until Abram came along that God decided to create for Himself a special group of people, a royal priesthood, a holy people to Himself. And He picked Abram to do that. Remember that He came to Abram, and Abram's an old guy, and his wife had never had any children, and he thought he never would. And but he was rich. He had all kinds of flocks and herds because God had told him to leave his family, and he had gone to a country that God had shown him. He made one mistake. God said, leave your family behind, but he took his nephew Lot. At any rate, that would cost him over time. But at any rate, God decided to start a special group through him, the Jews, and He gave them a special covenant. And the covenant was marked by circumcision. And over time, this was the royal priesthood. This was the people, the special anointed people of God, the Jews. Not only did God have a special covenant with them, that He would bless them, and He would keep them, and He would protect them, and He would make their path straight, and He would destroy their enemies. He had a covenant with their whole nation. Israel is the only nation on the earth in covenant with God. Now, they may or may not act like it always, but America is not in covenant with God. God has no special covenant with the nation of America. He has a special covenant with His New Testament Christians across the globe, but not with America. Only Israel is under covenant with God at this point. Keep that in mind. So anyway, the point is that through the Old Testament, you see Abram and Moses and David and all these great men of faith, and we tend to identify with them. But the fact is, the day that David slew Goliath, you'll recall he stood there with the armies of Israel behind him and the armies of the Philistines in front of him. And he screamed out, shouted at the guy, and said, "You uncircumcised Philistine, how dare you come against the armies of the living God? This day I will hew your head from your body and feed you to the birds of the air. And we feel like we're standing behind David saying, yeah, way to go. But in fact, we were standing behind Goliath and saying, tear his head off. We were part of the Philistines, the Amorites, the Amalekites, the termites. We were on the Egyptians' team when they chased Moses to the Red Sea. We were on the outs. Paul said, you guys are lucky. Only because the Jews rejected the Messiah. And the Jewish high priest essentially sacrificed him using the Roman occupation as the Lamb of God. And they rejected him. Jesus said, I came unto my own, and my own received me not. Only because of that did you have the opportunity to be grafted into this great covenant through the new covenant. So God established a new covenant, not based on the law, but based on grace. But Paul says, you were separated from God. You were without hope in this world. We were exposed fully to wrath, to the wrath of God. We had no special covering. But now, thanks to what Jesus has done through his atonement, we have access to the covenant, to a covenant with God, this new covenant that's built on grace. And it's so exciting. But what does it mean? Well, it means, for instance, the law never did have any application to us. The law wasn't to Gentiles. The Ten Commandments weren't to Gentiles. They just weren't. They were just to the Jews. Tithing has nothing to do with you. The tithe was for the nation, for the tribes of the Jews who had received land to be able to pay the bills for the Levite tribe who had not received land, and to also cover the cost of the temple and to pay for the widows and orphans and strangers in their midst, the people that needed that money. That's what the tithe was about. But it wasn't for Gentiles. You say, well, what about Abraham's tithe? Well, that's interesting. Abraham tithed one time, as far as we know. And the tithe was because Lot was living in Sodom, and guys like us, non-Jews, came and kidnapped him and stole all the goods in that town and took them off. And so Abram found out about it, went after his group, got all Lot's stuff back, and got all the king of Sodom stuff back, and also got all the stuff from the team that had taken over them, and brought them back, and met the king of Sodom and the high priest of that day, who was an archetype of Jesus Christ. His name was Melchizedek. It might have been Jesus if you read the scriptures. But at any rate, Melchizedek met him with bread and wine, and he gave a tenth of everything he had collected to Melchizedek. Now, surprisingly, he gave the rest of everything he collected, except for Lot and his people, back to the king of Sodom, because the whole thing was his. He had just gone and gotten it. In fact, he told the king of Sodom, I won't keep anything that I got lest you claim that you made Abram rich. So if you want to follow the Abrahamic tithing approach, first you only give other people's money, and secondly, you only do it one time, because that's the only time we know that Abram did it. We can talk about Jacob's pledge to tithe if you want later, but all this is part of a very, very rich history of God's people in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, we have a totally different approach for us Gentiles. The New Testament laws are these. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind, and all your strength. Number 2, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another. By this shall all men know that you're my disciples, if you have love one for another. Those are the commandments. Jesus said that all the law and all the prophet hang on these. You might add a third commandment, and that is go into all the countries, on all the nations, baptizing them and teaching them all that I have commanded you. So those 3, really, there's the whole New Testament. In those 3 commands to love the Lord your God, you'll do anything you can to show him how much you appreciate him. And that doesn't financially just mean a tithe. That means giving everything. Like Jesus asked from the rich young ruler, sell everything you have and give the money to the poor, and then come follow me. He said the lady that just put 2 mites in, she gave more than everybody. This isn't about a tithe. This is about thanking God for all he's done for you. I mean, we've been saved from wrath. This is incredible. There's nothing you can do to say thanks enough to God. And then in terms of taking care of love for our fellow man, Matthew 25 lays it out. Feed him, give him water, clothe him, give him shelter, visit him when he's sick and in prison. These are the things we have to be about. We get so busy playing church and being entertained and all that goes on Sundays that we forget that's not the point. Jesus didn't die to entertain us. Jesus died because he loved us and because he wanted us to show our love through his love, really, through us to others. So yes, we're saved by grace through faith, but we're saved to good works, to show out the great love of God. How else are you going to do Matthew 28 and preach into all the nations? People don't want to just hear preaching. I forget who it was that said, you should preach at all times, and when necessary, use words. We need to do that. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. Bye-bye.